Tom Weaver, a seasoned veteran, and his service dog, Scout, face rejection at Fisherman's catch when the manager demands they leave due to a no-dogs rule. As Tom exits with dignity, whispers and stares follow. Across the street, Marines in sharp-dressed blues march toward the restaurant, their purpose unclear. Tension hangs in the air. Will this escalate, or is something bigger at play? Tom, unaware of the gathering storm, shares a quiet moment with a scout, their bond forged in battle. The stage is set for a confrontation that could change the town forever, leaving readers craving the resolution. Thank you for diving into this heartfelt story. If it moved you, please like and subscribe for more tales of honor and humanity. Share your thoughts in the comments. How have you seen respect shine? Support our channel to keep these inspiring stories alive. Let's spread kindness together. Tom Weaver's weathered hand tightened around Scout's leash as they neared the entrance of Fisherman's Catch, a modest seafood joint nestled in the heart of their small coastal town. At 68, Tom carried the weight of a life shaped by turbulent seas and quieter, yet no less trying, personal battles. His silver hair, barely visible beneath a sun-bleached ball cap, glinted in the late afternoon sun, and his navy jacket, its cuffs frayed from years of wear, hung squarely on his broad shoulders. Beside him, Scout, a yellow Labrador, moved with a steady grace, his service vest a quiet declaration of purpose. The crisp autumn air carried the faint tang of salt and seaweed, stirring memories of Tom's decades at sea, days when the horizon was both a promise and a threat. Today, though, he sought only the simple comfort of a meal and a moment's reprieve from the solitude of his small apartment. As Tom reached for the glass door, a young delivery guy, no older than 20, came rushing up the sidewalk, his arms straining under a teetering stack of pizza boxes. The kid's face was flushed with effort, his brow furrowed in concentration. Without hesitation, Tom leaned forward, his free hand catching the door just before it could swing shut. "Hold the door, son," he said, his voice low but carrying the kind of authority that came from years of commanding respect, not demanding it. The delivery guy's eyes flicked up, surprise softening his tense expression, and he offered a quick, grateful nod, and he slipped inside. The warm scent of garlic, butter, and grilled fish spilled out, wrapping around Tom like an old friend's embrace. He gave Scout's head a gentle pat, feeling the familiar softness of his fur, and stepped into the restaurant, the leash slack but steady in his grip. Inside, Fisherman's Catch hummed with life. The soft clink of silverware mingled with the murmur of conversations, punctuated by the occasional burst of laughter from a corner booth. Tom's sharp blue eyes scanned the room, taking in the scene with the instinct of a man who'd learned to read a room or a deck in seconds. An older couple shared a plate of fried clams near the window, their hands brushing as they reached for the tartar sauce. A family of 4 sat at a larger table, the 2 young kids scribbling furiously on paper placemats, their crayons leaving bold streaks of red and blue. At the bar, a lone man nursed a beer, his gaze fixed on a muted football game flickering on the television. Tom chose a small booth tucked in the corner, far enough from the bustle to feel private, but close enough to the window to catch the fading light. Scout glided under the table with practiced ease, turning once before settling onto the cool floor, his chin resting lightly across Tom's worn leather boot. The contact, slight as it was, grounded Tom, easing the faint restlessness that had been gnawing at him all day. A young waitress, her ponytail bouncing slightly as she moved, approached with a glass of water and a menu. "Evening, sir," she said with a warm smile, her voice bright but not overly chipper. Tom returned a polite nod, his lips curving just enough to acknowledge her kindness. As she walked away, he glanced at the menu, his eyes skimming the specials, crab cakes, grilled shrimp, lobster bisque, without much enthusiasm. He hadn't come for the food, not really. It was the change of scenery he craved, a break from the quiet of his home, where the ticking of the clock sometimes felt louder than his own thoughts. Across the table, Scout lifted his head, his soft brown eyes meeting Tom's with an unspoken understanding. The dog's calm presence was a balm, a reminder that Tom wasn't as alone as he sometimes felt. Minutes passed, the rhythm of the restaurant steady and comforting. Then a shadow fell across the table, abrupt and looming. Tom looked up, his fingers pausing on the rim of his water glass. A man stood before him, his crisp white shirt and black apron marking him as the manager. A small badge gleamed on his chest, catching the overhead light. His arms were folded, his jaw set, and his eyes carried a hardness that made Tom's stomach tighten. "Sir," the manager said, his voice flat but loud enough to carry to the nearby tables, "we don't allow dogs inside." The words landed like a slap, sharp and deliberate. Tom leaned back slightly, his posture calm, but his mind racing. He could feel the weight of curious glances from other diners, the subtle shift in the room's atmosphere as conversations faltered. "He's not just a dog," Tom replied, his voice even but firm, each word chosen with care. "He's my service partner." The truth of it ran deeper than the manager could know. Scout wasn't just a companion, he was Tom's anchor, the one who sensed the tremors of anxiety before Tom himself could name them, the one who stayed steady when the world felt like it was tilting. The manager shook his head, his expression unchanging. "Rules are rules," he said, his tone clipped. "I'm going to have to ask you both to leave." For a moment, Tom didn't move. His gaze dropped to Scout, who watched him with unwavering trust, his ears slightly raised as if waiting for a cue. Tom's chest tightened, not with anger, but with a weary frustration. He'd faced this before, people who saw only a dog, not the lifeline Scout represented. With a slow, measured breath, Tom pushed back from the booth and stood, his back straight despite the faint ache in his left leg, a souvenir from a fall on a slick deck years ago. Scout rose with him, the leash taut but not pulling, his posture alert and disciplined. As they turned toward the door, the restaurant's hum faded, replaced by a heavy silence. Eyes followed them, some curious, some sympathetic, others simply uncomfortable. Tom kept his head high, his grip on the leash steady, but inside a quiet hurt bloomed. He'd wanted one evening, just one, where he and Scout could simply be. As they reached the glass door, Tom caught sight of movement across the street. A group of Marines, their dress blues sharp and striking in the golden afternoon light, were crossing the road, their steps purposeful. Their presence stirred something in Tom, pride, yes, but also a flicker of hope. He adjusted his grip on Scout's leash, his resolve hardening. Whatever came next, he and Scout would face it together as they always had. As Tom and Scout stepped out of the restaurant, a hush rippled through the lively chatter inside, like a stone dropped into a still pond. Conversation stumbled, fading into murmurs. A young child, perched on the edge of a booth, peeked over with eyes wide as saucers, curiosity painting her face as she watched the old man and his dog depart. Near the window, a teenage boy, lanky and engrossed in his phone, subtly tilted the device, capturing Tom and Scout's exit in a quiet, almost secretive act of documentation. His fingers moved swiftly, as if the moment might slip away if he didn't trap it in his camera roll. Outside, the autumn wind swirled, coaxing golden leaves into a restless dance along the curb. Tom stepped onto the sidewalk, his weathered hand tucked into the pocket of his worn jacket, the other gently gripping Scout's leash. His gait was uneven, each step a quiet negotiation with the leg that bore the scars of battles long past. Every movement carried the weight of miles marched, of moments survived. Scout, the yellow Labrador, moved with a grace that belied his own age, his golden coat flecked with gray but his eyes sharp and attentive. He glanced up at Tom every few steps, a silent check-in, as if to ensure his companion was still steady, still present. Across the street, a group of Marines in crisp dress blues began to gather, their uniforms a striking contrast against the soft oranges and reds of the autumn afternoon. Their polished shoes gleamed, and their purposeful strides carried them toward the restaurant. Tom's eyes lingered on them for a moment, a flicker of recognition stirring deep within. He didn't rush to cross the street. Instead, he let his steps fall slowly, deliberately, as if savoring the crisp air, or perhaps avoiding the inevitable pull of memory. Scout stayed close, his leash slack but his presence unwavering, a loyal shadow at Tom's side. They reached a wooden bench near the park, its surface cool and smooth from the autumn breeze. Tom eased himself down with a quiet sigh, the kind that carried the weight of years rather than just the moment. Scout settled at his feet, tail curled neatly around his body, his posture alert yet calm, a testament to years of training and trust. From his jacket pocket, Tom retrieved a sandwich or ball wrapped in wax paper, tuna on whole wheat, simple and unpretentious. He unfolded the paper with care, splitting the sandwich in two with a precision that spoke of routine. One half he placed on the bench for Scout, who waited, eyes locked on Tom's face, his discipline as sharp as ever. Only when Tom gave a subtle nod, a near imperceptible signal, did Scout lower his head, taking careful, measured bites. Tom watched him for a moment, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth, before taking a slow bite of his own half. He chewed mechanically, his gaze drifting across the street to the restaurant, his thoughts wandering somewhere far beyond the present. Inside the fisherman's catch, life carried on as if Tom and Scout's departure had been a mere ripple. Through the large windows, Tom could see the hostess, her laughter bright as she shared a joke with a coworker, her hands animated in the air. Diners leaned over their plates, forks clinking against porcelain, their conversations a low hum that filled the space with warmth. No one seemed to notice the old man on the bench. No one except the teenager, still pressed against the window, his phone capturing every mundane detail of Tom's quiet moment. Tom shook his head, a mix of amusement and weariness settling into his expression. His hand slipped into his pocket, fingers brushing against a small, worn photograph encased in clear plastic. He pulled it out, holding it delicately between his thumb and forefinger, as if it were a fragile relic. The image captured a younger Tom, his face streaked with dust and exhaustion, his eyes half closed as he lay on a makeshift stretcher. Beside him stood a younger Scout, his coat a rich, unblemished gold, ears pricked and alert, a military harness strapped across his chest. The memory of that day surged forward, sharp and vivid, cutting through the years like a blade. Tom's chest tightened, not with pain, but with the weight of recollection. The chaos, the heat, the bond that had carried them both through. He exhaled slowly through his nose, tucking the photo back into his pocket, his fingers grazing the smooth edge of a challenge coin nestled beside it. A gift from a commanding officer, its weight a quiet reminder of duty, of sacrifice, of a life left behind. He glanced down at Scout, whose head now rested lightly against his knee, the dog's warmth a steady anchor. "Kicked out again, aren't we, Scout?" Tom murmured, his voice low, meant only for the dog. Scout's tail gave a single, deliberate thump against the ground, a soft reassurance that some things, at least, remained constant. Tom's lips twitched, not quite a smile, but something close, a flicker of gratitude for the companion who had never wavered. A woman hurried past on the sidewalk, her young daughter trailing behind. The girl's eyes, wide and curious, locked onto Scout, her small face alight with wonder at the calm, golden dog. But her mother's sharp hiss cut through the moment. "Don't talk to strangers. Don't go near strange dogs." The girl's head snapped forward, her steps quickening to match her mother's pace. Tom's gaze dropped to his hands, rough and calloused from years of labor, of gripping rifles and leashes, and the weight of survival. A familiar twinge stirred in his chest, not anger, but something softer, quieter. Resignation, perhaps, or the dull ache of being unseen in a world that moved on without him. He checked his watch, the motion automatic. Scout's medication was due soon. His fingers brushed the small pill bottle in his pocket, a reminder of the day they'd both been broken and pieced back together. Scout had taken a hit the same day Tom's leg was shattered, and their recovery had been a shared journey, one slow step at a time. A city bus rumbled by, its side emblazoned with a bold, patriotic ad. "Honor our veterans. They fought for your freedom." Tom let out a soft huff, the sound laced with irony. Sometimes the world honored veterans with parades and speeches. Other times it honored them by looking the other way, by letting them fade into the background of bustling restaurants and busy streets. Across the street, the door to the Fisherman's Catch swung open again. Tom's eyes sharpened, instinct pulling him back to the present. A small cluster of men and women in marine dress blues stepped out of parked SUVs, their polished shoes tapping against the sidewalk with a rhythm that echoed discipline. Their eyes were set straight ahead, their posture rigid, their purpose clear. Tom watched them, his expression unreadable, as the autumn breeze stirred the leaves at his feet and Scout's steady presence grounded him in the moment. Tom sat hunched on the splintered bench, the bite of autumn seeping through his threadbare jacket, chilling him in a way that felt deeper than just the weather. The cold seemed to settle into his bones, a quiet companion to the weariness that had become his shadow since coming home. Beside him, Scout, his service dog, pressed closer, the warmth of his fur against Tom's leg, a silent anchor in a world that often felt adrift. Scout's presence was a constant, a reminder of battles fought and survived, of loyalty that asked for nothing in return. Tom's fingers traced the frayed hem of his sleeve, a nervous habit born of too many sleepless nights, as his eyes lingered on Fisherman's catch across the street. The restaurant's warm glow taunted him, a stark contrast to the sting of rejection still burning in his chest. They hadn't just turned him away, they'd dismissed Scout, the partner who'd walked through hell with him, who'd saved lives when bullets flew and hope was scarce. The memory of the manager's curt, "No dogs allowed," echoed in Tom's mind, each word a fresh wound. He wondered, not for the first time, if the world he'd fought for even saw him anymore. Across the street, the restaurant's door swung open, the brass bell above it tinkling softly, a delicate sound swallowed by the rustle of leaves dancing along the pavement. Inside, the lunch rush had faded, leaving only a smattering of diners at the worn tables. The clatter of forks and the murmur of small talk filled the air. A mundane symphony of everyday life. A teenage waiter leaned against the counter, his face lit by the glow of his phone, lost in a world of likes and notifications. Near the back, the manager, the same one who'd sent Tom packing, laughed with the hostess, his voice carrying the easy arrogance of someone who felt untouchable. Neither noticed the sharp click of polished shoes on the hardwood, a sound that cut through the din like a warning. Captain Alyssa Monroe entered with a presence that reshaped the room. Her marine dress uniform was a study in perfection. Deep blue fabric, red trim sharp as a blade, brass buttons catching the light like tiny suns. The ribbons across her chest told stories of valor and loss, each one earned through sweat and sacrifice. Behind her, 4 Marines moved in lockstep, their faces carved from stone, their eyes scanning the space with a vigilance that spoke of training and instinct. The room seemed to pause, as if the very air recognized their authority. A businessman at the bar lowered his coffee, his fingers tightening around the mug as he sensed something momentous unfolding. A little girl, her spoon frozen midair, stared with wide, unblinking eyes, her curiosity untainted by the complexities of the adult world. The hum of the kitchen faded, and even the clinking of glasses seemed to hush, as if the restaurant itself was waiting to see what came next. The manager turned, his laughter dying as he took in the group. His smile faltered, replaced by a flicker of unease that deepened as he met Monroe's steady gaze. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice strained, the words more reflex than genuine offer. Monroe stepped forward, her movements precise, radiating a quiet power that needed no theatrics. She reached into her coat and produced a military ID, holding it up with a calm authority that made the manager's shoulders tense. "Captain Alyssa Monroe, Bravo Unit, 1st Marine Special Operations Battalion," she said, her voice clear and deliberate, each syllable carrying the weight of her rank. "I'm looking for Tom Weaver and his service dog, Scout." The manager's jaw worked soundlessly for a moment, his confidence crumbling. His eyes flicked to the hostess, who shrank back, then to the diners, who had gone quiet, their forks stilled, their attention riveted. Whispers rippled through the room, soft but electric, as curiosity gave way to something heavier. They left a bit ago," he managed, his hands twitching nervously. "There was some confusion, I think. I'm sure it was just a misunderstanding." Monroe's face remained impassive as she slipped the ID back into her coat. From under her arm, she drew a framed photograph, its edges worn from time, but the image within sharp and vivid. It showed a younger Tom, his face etched with the strain of war, standing beside Scout, whose alert ears and steady gaze seemed to pierce the frame. Both were dressed in desert gear, their boots dusted with sand, a snapshot of a moment when their purpose was clear. The caption below read, "Brothers in Arms." Monroe placed the frame on the counter with a quiet, deliberate motion, the sound reverberating in the hushed room. The manager flinched, his eyes locked on the photo as if it were a mirror reflecting his error in stark relief. Tom Weaver saved 4 men in my unit during an ambush outside Ramadi, she said, her voice steady but resonant, filling the space with a truth that demanded acknowledgement. His dog, Scout, has more confirmed saves than most combat medics. He holds an honorary rank in our unit, and together they've earned commendations that most soldiers only dream of. She paused, her gaze sweeping the room, taking in the teenage boy's reddening cheeks. The woman at the corner table who'd earlier complained about was now staring into her glass, her shoulders hunched with guilt. A server stood rooted, her tray of drinks trembling, her breath shallow as the weight of Monroe's words sank in. "You didn't just turn away a customer today," Monroe said, her voice cutting through the silence with a clarity that left no room for excuses. "You turned away an American hero." The words settled like stones, heavy and unmovable, a verdict delivered without malice but with unshakable conviction. She nodded once to her unit, a gesture so subtle it might have gone unnoticed by those less attuned. The youngest Marine stepped forward, his posture rigid but his eyes alight with purpose. He held up his phone, the screen casting a faint glow. "We'll be issuing a notice about this incident to our veteran support network," he said, his voice calm but firm. "Over 15,000 members statewide." The manager's face paled, his hands clasped tightly in front of him, as if to hold himself together. "It's a misunderstanding," he said faintly, his voice breaking. "I didn't know." "That's the problem," Monroe cut in, her tone gentle but unyielding. "Respect shouldn't require a resume." The words lingered, a quiet indictment that seemed to echo in the minds of everyone present. She turned, her unit moving with her in perfect unison, their steps a silent testament to their unity. As they approached the door, she paused, casting one final glance over her shoulder, her eyes sweeping the room with a look that was both a warning and an appeal. "We hope you'll reconsider how you welcome those who've served," she said, her voice soft but piercing, a call to do better that lingered in the air. Then they were gone, the door closing behind them, the bell's faint chime trailing into the rustling leaves of the afternoon. Inside, the silence was absolute, broken only by the low hum of the bar's refrigerator behind the bar and the distant echo of the bell fading into the crisp air. The diners sat motionless, their thoughts a tangle of awe, shame, and reflection, each wrestling with the truth they'd just witnessed. The manager stared at the framed photo, his hands trembling, his mind churned with the realization of what his actions had set in motion. Across the street, Tom sat on the bench, his breath misting in the cold. Scout shifted at his feet, his ears twitching as the Marines emerged, their figures stark against the dimming sky. Tom's brows knitted together, a spark of curiosity piercing the fog of his exhaustion. He didn't know what had transpired inside, but he felt the change, a subtle ripple in the air that hinted at something larger than himself. Scout's quiet warmth beside him was a reminder that, no matter what lay ahead, they were in it together. The steady rhythm of boots against the cracked pavement cut through the stillness of the afternoon, a sound that stirred something deep within Tom Weaver. He hadn't expected company, not today, not after the sting of what had happened. The weight of humiliation clung to him, heavy as the summer heat, but those approaching footsteps sparked a flicker of something else, something like hope, though he'd never admit it. Scout, his faithful companion, lifted his head from Tom's boot, ears twitching, his sharp senses picking up the shift in the air before Tom could even process it. Captain Sarah Monroe led the group, her stride confident yet unhurried, the kind of walk that spoke of someone who'd stared down chaos and walked away whole. As she closed the distance, Tom's gaze caught the fine details of her face, the faint lines around her eyes, etched by years of worry and resolve, and the small, jagged scar near her temple, a quiet reminder of battles fought and survived. Her posture was steady, a silent anchor in the storm of the world, and her eyes held a depth that made Tom's chest tighten with recognition. "Mr. Weaver," she said, her voice low but clear, cutting through the haze of his thoughts. "Permission to sit?" Tom's lips twitched, a faint acknowledgement of the formality that felt both foreign and familiar. He shifted on the weathered bench, the wood groaning softly under his weight. "Go ahead," he'd murmured, his voice rough, like it had been dragged over gravel. Scout's eyes darted between them, his body still but alert, waiting for Tom's signal with the unwavering loyalty that had carried them both through darker days. Monroe settled beside him, her movements deliberate, while the other Marines spread out around them. Some stood tall, their silhouettes sharp against the fading daylight. Others crouched low, their eyes softening as they glanced at Scout, who sniffed the air curiously but stayed rooted by Tom's side. "We heard what happened," Monroe said, her voice softened by a thread of empathy that caught Tom off guard. The words hung between them, heavy with unspoken understanding. Didn't seem right to just let it pass. Tom's hand drifted to his face, fingers brushing over the stubble on his jaw as he looked down at Scout. The dog's steady gaze met his, a silent exchange that spoke volumes. "Didn't expect anyone to make a fuss," Tom said, his voice barely above a whisper, the sting of the day's rejection still burning in his chest like a slow fire. Monroe's lips curved into a brief, knowing half-smile, the kind that carried the weight of shared history. "You never did," she said, her tone warm, like a hand extended in the dark. She reached into her pocket, her movements careful, almost reverent, and pulled out a small object wrapped in a worn cloth. "We're shipping out next month," she said, her voice steady but laced with something deeper. Pride, perhaps, or resolve, but "Before we go, the guys wanted you to have this." She unfolded the cloth, revealing a unit coin, its surface polished to a mirror-like gleam, the edges engraved with the intricate insignia of Bravo Unit. The sight of it hit Tom like a wave, memories crashing over him. Dusty trails, the sharp crack of gunfire, the weight of a rifle in his hands, and Scout's steady presence at his side, a constant through it all. His fingers brushed the coin's cool surface, tracing the familiar lines of the insignia. His throat tightened, emotions he'd long buried rising to the surface. Gratitude, grief, pride, all tangled together in a knot too complex to unravel. He nodded once, a sharp, controlled motion, unable to trust his voice. Scout shifted slightly, his tail thumping softly against the bench leg, as if sensing the storm brewing in his master's heart. A younger Marine, barely more than a kid, crouched nearby, his eyes bright with a mix of awe and caution. He extended a hand, palm up, his voice soft as he murmured, "Hey, buddy." Scout's nose twitched, giving the offered hand a brief sniff before his tail gave a gentle wag, a small gesture of trust that felt like a gift. The moment was fragile, a thread stretched thin but holding strong, and Tom felt his chest ache with the weight of it. Monroe leaned forward, her elbows resting on her knees, her gaze steady but searching. "We saw the footage, sir," she said, her voice carrying a quiet intensity that made Tom's breath catch. "You walked out of there with your head high. That means more to us than you probably realize." Tom let out a small huff, a sound caught between a laugh and a sigh. The memory of that moment sharp in his mind, the stares, the whispers, the bitter sting of being turned away. "Wasn't much else to do," he said, his tone gruff but honest, the weight of that choice settling into his bones. "Exactly," Monroe replied, her voice firm but kind, like a lighthouse cutting through fog. "That's why it matters." She stood, brushing off her slacks with a quick, practiced motion, and for a moment Tom saw the younger version of her, the fierce, determined Marine who'd stood shoulder to shoulder with him in places where hope was a rare commodity. Behind her, a figure approached hesitantly, a teenager from the restaurant, his phone now tucked away, his hands clutching a takeout bag. The boy's steps faltered, his weight shifting nervously from one foot to the other, his eyes darting between Tom and the ground, as if he feared the weight of his own words. Tom raised an eyebrow, his expression unreadable but curious, a flicker of curiosity cutting through the haze of his thoughts. The boy cleared his throat, his voice trembling slightly. We were wrong," he said, the words tumbling out in a rush, raw with sincerity. "I'm sorry." He extended the bag, his hands unsteady, a handwritten note tied beneath the string fluttering in the breeze. "It's on the house." Tom studied him for a long moment, the boy's earnestness chipping away at the bitterness that had settled in his chest. He took the bag, his fingers brushing the rough paper, and gave a small nod. "Appreciate it," he said, his voice even, devoid of anger, but carrying the weight of a man who'd learned to forgive without forgetting. As the boy retreated, his shoulders slumping with relief, Scout let out a low, contented huff, resting his chin back on Tom's boot, his warmth a steady anchor. Tom glanced at the Marines, a flicker of humor sparking in his eyes, a rare break in the storm cloud of his thoughts. "What do you think, Scout? Should we give him another shot?" Scout's tail wagged once, slow and deliberate, and a quiet chuckle rippled through the group. For a moment they stood there, bound by an unspoken understanding. A man, his dog, and a handful of Marines who still knew what honor felt like. Their presence a quiet defiance against a world that sometimes forgot. One by one, the Marines turned, their silhouettes blending into the golden afternoon light, the polished buttons on their uniforms catching the sun like tiny beacons as they made their way back to their vehicles. Tom watched them go, the unit coin heavy in his hand, its weight grounding him, as Scout's warmth pressed against his leg, a reminder that some bonds could weather any storm. A week later, a new sign appeared in the window of Fisherman's Catch, its bold letters proclaiming, "We proudly welcome veterans and their service companions." Below it hung a framed black and white photo, a tribute to military working dogs across generations. From the messengers of World War II, their eyes sharp with purpose, to the K-9 teams of Iraq and Afghanistan, their loyalty etched in every line. Word spread like wildfire through the small town, and by Friday evening, a crowd had gathered outside the restaurant, their voices a low hum of anticipation, their faces lit with a mix of curiosity and respect. Tom stood at the edge of the sidewalk, Scout sitting calmly at his side, his head tilted slightly as if taking in the scene with quiet dignity. He hadn't planned to come. Crowds made his skin itch, the noise a reminder of things best left buried. But Captain Monroe's call had been insistent, her voice carrying that same quiet authority that had always made him listen. The weight of Scout's presence against his leg was a steady anchor, a reminder of the bond that had carried him through the darkest days, when the world had felt like it was crumbling beneath his feet. The ceremony was short but heavy with meaning. The leader of the local Veterans Association stepped forward, microphone in hand, his words ringing with gratitude and respect, each one landing like a stone in still water. When Scout was presented with an honorary medal, a small medallion engraved with the words "Four-Legged Hero," Tom felt a swell of pride so fierce it nearly knocked the breath from him. Scout sat tall, his eyes bright and alert, as if he understood the weight of the moment, his presence a quiet testament to the bond they shared. The crowd's applause washed over them, a wave of sound that felt both foreign and warm. But for Tom, it was the steady pressure of Scout's shoulder against his leg that mattered most. A quiet reminder that they'd made it through, together in a small town where the rhythm of life moved with the predictability of the seasons. A group of children from the local elementary school gathered to honor a man named Tom, a veteran whose quiet presence carried the weight of unspoken stories. Their small hands clutched handmade cards, each one a burst of color with crayon-drawn images of dings, camouflage flags, and wobbly, heartfelt messages of gratitude. Among them, a boy's small frame stood out, his steps hesitant as he approached, his mother lingering a few feet behind, her eyes soft with encouragement. He held a card tightly, as if it were a treasure he was both eager and afraid to share. Stopping before Tom, his gaze flickered nervously between the weathered man and the loyal dog at his side, Scout. In a voice barely above a whisper, he asked, "Does he understand when people say thank you?" The question trembled with sincerity, a child's curiosity laced with a desire to connect, his young heart sensing the gravity of the moment without fully grasping it. Tom, his movements deliberate and slowed by time, lowered himself onto one knee, the stiffness in his joint a silent reminder of battles fought long ago. He rested a hand on Scout's head, the dog's fur warm under his calloused fingers, a tether to the present amidst memories that lingered like shadows. "He doesn't need the words, kiddo," Tom said, his voice low and steady, carrying a warmth that seemed to wrap around the boy like a blanket. "Scout just needs to be near the people who remember what he's done for them." The boy's face lit up, a grin breaking through his shy demeanor, his eyes sparkling with pride as Scout leaned forward, giving the card a gentle sniff before settling back at Tom's side. In that fleeting exchange, the Marsh felt a spark of connection, as if his small gesture had bridged a gap he hadn't fully understood until now, his heart swelling with the knowledge that he'd honored someone who mattered. Inside Fisherman's Catch, the restaurant that had become a cornerstone of the town's daily life, change was stirring beneath the surface. The manager who had once presided over the place with rigid adherence to rules was gone, having resigned the day after a visit from Tom and Scout that had left him shaken to his core. In his absence, he left a handwritten letter for the owner, its words raw and honest, penned in the quiet hours of a sleepless night. He confessed that he had misunderstood the true meaning of service, respect, and dignity, values no rulebook could fully teach. The lesson had come not from policy, but from witnessing the quiet strength of a man in his day, a moment that had unraveled his certainties and left him humbled. The new owner, a woman whose father had carried the scars of Vietnam in his silence, took the helm with a vision shaped by her own history. She ensured her staff underwent training on service animals and the Americans with Disabilities Act, her resolve firm, but her heart open. Yet her ambitions stretched further. She launched a monthly veterans dinner, a gathering where local servicemen and women could share their stories, laugh, and find solace in a community that too often let its heroes fade into the shadows. Tom and Scout became fixtures at these dinners, their corner booth marked by a small American flag and a plaque that read, "Tom and Scout Bravo, Team Never Forgotten." The words, simple yet profound, were a testament to the bond between the man and his dog, a partnership forged in sacrifice and loyalty that resonated with everyone who saw them. One evening, as the sun dipped below the rolling hills, casting a golden glow through the restaurant's windows, the teenage waiter from a past incident approached Tom's table. His hands were stuffed deep in his pockets, his posture caught between guilt and resolve, his heart pounding with the weight of what he needed to say. "I deleted the video," he said, his eyes darting up to meet Tom's before dropping away, shame and sincerity warring within him. "And my brother just enlisted. I guess I wanted to say, thanks for everything." The words spilled out, clumsy but earnest, carrying the weight of a young man grappling with newfound understanding, his perspective shifted by the realization of what service truly meant. Tom studied him for a moment, his gaze steady but kind, seeing not just the boy but the man he was becoming. He extended his hand across the table, a gesture of forgiveness and trust. "Be that someone for him," he said softly, his voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who knew the cost of service. The boy nodded, a flicker of determination in his eyes as he walked away, his steps lighter, as if Tom's words had given him a purpose to carry forward. Scout, ever vigilant, shifted slightly, pressing his body against Tom's leg as a car backfired outside, the sound sharp and jarring, slicing through the calm like a memory of chaos. Tom's breath caught for a moment, his fingers instinctively brushing Scout's head, grounding himself in the familiar warmth of his companion. The dog's presence was a quiet anchor, a reminder that some bonds could weather any storm. Around them, the restaurant's hum paused, not out of curiosity or judgment, but in a quiet act of respect, as if the room itself understood the weight of that fleeting moment and chose to honor it. Outside, the autumn wind tugged at the flag above the doorway, its fabric rippling in the fading light, while the restaurant's new sign caught the last rays of evening, glowing with a promise of renewal. Inside, Tom leaned back in his booth, Scout at his feet, the murmur of voices around them a reminder that even a small town could learn to honor its heroes, their sacrifices woven into the fabric of everyday life. Over the months that followed, the ripple effects of that afternoon spread through the town in ways no one could have predicted. What began as a simple act of recognition outside Fisherman's Catch grew into a movement that breathed new life into the community. The monthly veterans dinners became a cherished tradition, marked on calendars with the same reverence as holidays. Retirees in ball caps embroidered with the names of ships long decommissioned sat alongside young reservists in crisp uniforms, their stories weaving a tapestry of shared experience that spanned generations. Families came too, drawn by a desire to listen, to understand, to be part of something larger than themselves. Their presence a quiet pledge to keep the stories alive. At the heart of it all was Tom, often found at his corner table with Scout at his side, his quiet presence a beacon for those who needed it. He shared stories of his own, some heavy with loss, others light with camaraderie, each one a thread connecting the past to the present, a reminder that healing could come through connection. One night, Tom looked up to see the teenage waiter, now less a boy and more a young man, approaching with a box of programs for the evening's event. Mind if I set these here, he asked, his voice steadier than before, carrying a confidence tempered by humility. Tom gave a short nod, his eyes warm with recognition. Sure, kid. The young man hesitated, then spoke again, his words soft but deliberate, each one chosen with care. My brother shipped out last week, he said, his voice tinged with both pride and worry, the emotions of a sibling left behind to wait in hope. Just wanted you to know I get it now, what you and Scout were doing that day. Tom's eyes softened, and for a moment the weight of his own memories seemed to lift, replaced by a quiet pride in the young man's growth. He didn't need to say much. The nod he gave was enough, a silent acknowledgement of the boy's journey toward understanding. The young man walked away, carrying a newfound sense of purpose, while Tom and Scout remained, the quiet hum of the restaurant wrapping around them like a promise that their sacrifices would not be forgotten. Their legacy carried forward by a community learning to stand beside its heroes. Tom sat in the familiar corner booth at Fisherman's Catch, his eyes tracing the lines of the young man standing before him. There was a hesitance in the boy's posture, a nervous energy that Tom recognized, not from battles or medals, but from the quiet struggles that linger long after the guns fall silent. With a slow, deliberate gesture, Tom motioned to the empty chair across from him. Take a seat, he said, his voice low but steady, carrying the weight of someone who'd seen too much yet still found room for patience. Scout, his ever-present service dog, lay beneath the table, his warm head resting on Tom's boot, grounding them both in the moment. Their conversation didn't linger on war stories or heroics. Instead, it wandered into the unspoken burdens people carry, the kind that sit heavy on the chest, invisible to the world but ever present. Tom listened, his weathered hands folded, as the young man spoke haltingly about his own fears, his brother deployed overseas, and the uncertainty that gnawed at him. Tom nodded, not offering platitudes but sharing fragments of his own truth, the small rituals that kept him moving forward. A walk with Scout at dawn, the feel of a warm mug in his hands, the sound of the world waking up around him. At Fisherman's Catch, change had taken root, blooming into something no one had expected. The restaurant's owner, a gruff but kind-hearted man named Eddie, had seen the way Tom and Scout moved through the world, quietly, purposefully, like they were stitching themselves into the town's rhythm. Inspired, Eddie reached out to local veterans, inviting them to train his staff on how to welcome service animals with respect and care. The hostess, a young woman named Clara, who once froze when Scout first padded into the restaurant, now kept a water dish polished and ready behind the counter, alongside a small basket of dog treats she'd bought with her own money. Her initial uncertainty had given way to a quiet pride. She'd learned to see Scout not just as a button, but as an extension of Tom, a partner who carried as much weight as any soldier. The restaurant itself had transformed into a gathering place, not just for meals, but for connection. Families started bringing their children to the veterans' dinners, not only to share a plate of fried fish or clam chowder, but to sit and listen. The kids, wide-eyed and curious, soaked up stories of courage and loss, while their parents learned to see the veterans not as distant figures, but as neighbors, woven into the same community tapestry. One chilly autumn evening, Captain Alyssa Monroe returned to town, her Marine unit in tow, just days before their next deployment. They claimed the long table by the window, their laughter and clinking glasses filling the room with a warmth that pushed back the encroaching cold. Alyssa, her dark hair pulled back tightly, carried herself with the steady confidence of someone who'd faced chaos and come out the other side. Yet her eyes softened when they landed on Tom and Scout across the room. Raising her glass in a quiet toast, she led her unit in a gesture of respect, a silent acknowledgement of shared burdens. After the meal, Alyssa approached Tom, her boots clicking softly on the wooden floor. Her smile was small but genuine, carrying a trace of the weight she bore as a leader. We're shipping out soon, she said, her voice steady, but tinged with the unspoken fear of what lay ahead. The guys wanted you to have this. She pressed a unit insignia patch into his hand, the fabric worn and soft from years of being carried through dust and danger. Tom's thumb brushed over the stitching, feeling the texture of a life he understood too well. His throat tightened, but he kept his voice even. Tell them it's got a good home, he said, meeting her gaze with a nod that said more than words could. Outside, autumn surrendered to winter, the air growing sharp with the scent of wood smoke and the distant laughter of neighbors. Tom often sat on his porch, Scout curled at his side, watching the sun dip below the horizon in a blaze of orange and gold. The jingle of Scout's collar as he shifted his head was a small, familiar sound that anchored Tom in the present, pulling him back from the memories that sometimes crept in uninvited. The town had changed, not in grand gestures, but in the quiet ways that matter most. Where people once averted their eyes or whispered behind cupped hands, they now offered nods of recognition, stopped to exchange a few words, or simply listened. For Tom, who had once wondered if there was still a place for someone like him, a man shaped by war and loss, these small acts were lifelines. A door held open, a takeout bag pressed into his hands with a smile, a patch passed from one calloused hand to another. These were the threads that wove him back into the fabric of the town, one quiet moment at a time. As winter deepened, the routines Tom cherished became a steady pulse in his life. The veterans' dinners at Fisherman's Catch continued, drawing larger crowds even on the snowiest nights. Families bundled in scarves and coats filled the restaurant, their breath fogging in the cold as they hurried inside. Children clutched handmade thank you cards, their crayon-scrawled words a testament to the lessons they were learning about gratitude and sacrifice. Old veterans swapped stories by the crackling fire, their voices a mix of gravel and warmth. While Tom remained a quiet constant in his corner booth, Scout's steady presence at his feet. Even when blizzards kept others indoors, Tom and Scout made their way through town, their footprints carving paths in the snow. They'd stop at the park where Scout would sniff the frosted grass or pause to chat with neighbors clearing their driveways. People who once looked away now waved warmly, slowed at crosswalks to let them pass, and children approached with eager eyes, always waiting for Tom's quiet nod before reaching out to pet Scout's soft fur. One crisp February afternoon, Tom sat on his porch, a wool blanket draped over his lap and a steaming mug of coffee warming his hands. Scout lay beside him, his head resting on Tom's boot, his steady breathing a quiet reassurance in the stillness. Across the street, the teenager who had once filmed Tom on his phone, back when curiosity bordered on intrusion, emerged from his house, his backpack slung over one shoulder as he headed toward the Veterans Center. Tom watched him for a moment, noting the way the boy carried himself with a little more purpose now. "Hey, kid," Tom called out, his voice cutting through the cold air. The teenager paused, turning with a hint of surprise. "Tell your brother to keep his head down," Tom said, raising his coffee mug in a small salute. The boy's smile was awkward but genuine, a flicker of connection across the divide of age and experience. "I will, Mr. Weaver," he replied before continuing on his way. That evening, Fisherman's Catch buzzed with life once more. A new plaque gleamed near the entrance, etched with the names of local veterans, past and present, beneath a simple inscription: "We honor their service." Tom's name sat near the top, followed by a smaller line that read, "And their loyal companions." Inside, the air was thick with warmth, laughter, clinking glasses, and the low hum of stories shared over plates of food. Captain Monroe had returned briefly, her presence a quiet anchor for her unit and the town alike. She sat with her Marines, their faces a mix of pride and apprehension, knowing the road ahead would test them again. But for now, they were here, surrounded by a community that had learned to see them, truly see them, as more than just soldiers or stories. For Tom, the restaurant, the town, and the small, steady presence of Scout at his side were reminders that even in the coldest winters, connection could bloom, stitching together the broken pieces of a man and his world, one quiet moment at a time. A letter penned from distant lands now rested in a simple frame near the restaurant's hostess stand, its words a heartfelt thank you to the town for its unwavering support. The staff, once tentative and unsure, had blossomed into warm, self-assured hosts. They glided through the dining room, offering water bowls and treats to service dogs with a moment's hesitation, their actions a quiet testament to a newfound understanding. The clatter of plates and the hum of conversation filled the air, but beneath it all was a subtle shift, a community learning to see those who had long gone unnoticed. As the evening wound down, a teenage waiter approached Tom's table, his movements steady and practiced as he cleared away the empty plates. He paused, his hands lingering on the table's edge, a flicker of nervousness in his eyes. After a beat, he spoke, his voice soft but resolute. "I signed up to volunteer at the VA center next month. I thought you'd want to know." The words hung in the air, carrying a weight far beyond their simplicity. Tom, who had been gazing absently at the tabletop, lifted his eyes. A faint smile tugged at the corners of his mouth, softening the lines etched by years of unspoken burdens. "That's a good start," he said, his voice low and steady, but laced with a quiet pride that made the boy stand a little taller. For Tom, it wasn't just about the act itself. It was the spark of recognition and the proof that his presence, his story, had rippled outward, touching someone young enough to carry it forward. As the crowd dwindled and the restaurant grew still, Tom rose from his booth, his movements deliberate, as if each step grounded him in the moment. He slipped on his jacket, the fabric settling over his shoulders like an old friend. Scout, his service dog, stretched languidly, his fur rippling as he gave a gentle shake, the jingle of his collar a familiar melody in the quiet. Together they stepped out into the winter night. The air was sharp, biting at Tom's cheeks, and the stars above glittered like shards of glass against the inky sky. Each breath clouded in front of him, a reminder of the world's quiet beauty, and for a moment Tom felt lighter, as if the weight of his past had loosened its grip. At home, Tom eased into his worn chair by the window, the one that had borne witness to countless evenings like this. Scout curled up on the rug at his feet, his steady breathing a comforting rhythm in the stillness. Tom's hand drifted to his pocket, fingers brushing against the familiar shapes within. A unit coin, its edges smoothed by years of touch. A patch from Captain Monroe, its threads a silent tribute to a bond forged in chaos. And a faded photo of a younger Tom standing beside a spry, bright-eyed Scout. He laid them out on the armrest, each item a tether to memories that flickered like candlelight in his mind. There were moments of raw fear, when survival seemed a distant hope, moments of fierce loyalty, when Scout's presence had been his only anchor, and now moments of quiet triumph, as a town learned to honor what he and others like him had carried. Outside, the wind tugged at the flag hanging from the porch, its soft rustle a reminder of the world beyond his walls. Tom leaned back, his hand resting on Scout's head, the dog's warmth grounding him in the present. He didn't crave grand gestures, no parades, no speeches, no banners proclaiming his worth. What he needed was this: the quiet companionship of Scout, the knowledge that his story had been seen, and the comfort of a town that, for once, refused to forget. In that moment, Tom felt a rare peace, a sense that his life, with all its scars and silences, had found a place to rest. As winter gave way to spring, Tom and Scout continued their walks through town. Their steps a familiar rhythm on the sidewalks, but the town itself had transformed. It wasn't just the restaurant that had learned to offer kindness without prompting. It was the way neighbors nodded in acknowledgement, their smiles carrying a deeper understanding. It was the way children paused to ask Scout's name, their curiosity a bridge to stories they might one day comprehend. The change was subtle, woven into the fabric of daily life, but it was profound. This was no longer a town that paid lip service to gratitude on holidays. It was a community that had learned to live it through small acts of respect and recognition. Tom's story and Scout's served as a quiet challenge to everyone they met. In a world that often rushed past the unseen, where people were caught in the whirl of their own lives, it asked them to pause, to notice the veterans who walked among them, carrying stories and wounds that didn't always show, to understand that service dogs like Scout were more than pets. They were lifelines, companions, and silent healers who stood vigil over hearts that had seen too much. It urged people to ask themselves, who am I overlooking? What small gesture could I offer that might ripple outward, changing a moment, a day, or even a life? The legacy of Tom and Scout wasn't in headlines or grand ceremonies. It was in the teenage waiter who found purpose in volunteering, in the restaurant staff who learned to see beyond the surface, in the town that began to model respect in its everyday interactions. It was a reminder that gratitude isn't confined to a single day or a fleeting moment. It's in the way we hold a door, offer a kind word, or take the time to learn someone's name before passing judgment. Through their quiet presence, Tom and Scout had shown that the smallest acts of kindness could weave a tapestry of change, one that stretched far beyond the boundaries of a single town.